We are fascinated with our origin and where we came from. From personality tests to DNA testing kits, our collective question seems to be, who am I? This journey is more than genetic, and it's bigger than personality. Humanity's spiritual lineage, a history that has brought us to this very moment, has shaped you. How you think, how you live, who you are. The entire story of humanity begins with a book of the Bible that literally means formation, a book called Genesis. Discover your spiritual origins and why your oldest history matters in the here and now.
Just before midnight on August the 17th, 1969, a catastrophic hurricane named Camille made landfall on the Mississippi coast. It was born as a gentle storm moving across Africa 12 days earlier, and no one had any idea it would be so devastating, especially people who lived in central Virginia. Camille moved quickly through the region of the Gulf of Mexico here in the U.S., and while still causing hurricane-level damage, her speed was her merciful attribute. She didn't hang out. She moved on to make her mark in other places. So as Camille moved up into the interior and through Mississippi and started to make this turn here in Tennessee and Kentucky, meteorologists all agreed that the danger was largely over. The weakening storm had done what it came to do, and we could all breathe easy as she breathed her last breath and moved on out into the Atlantic. That's what they all thought, but they were all wrong. It arrived in Virginia on the evening of August 19th, 1969, and while the winds were no longer hurricane strength, the pressure in the storm was surprisingly low. And what that meant was that Camille could still pull shocking quantities of water into its tower of clouds and then release the deluge on Virginia's unsuspecting mountains. In Nelson County, just a 90-minute drive from where I'm standing right now, a record 27 inches of rain fell in 12 hours. Much of it fell in a 5 to 6 hour period. That's the official record. There are many unofficial reports of much more. In fact, the National Weather Service said that so much rain came in Nelson County from Camille that it was, and I'm quoting now, the probable maximum rainfall which meteorologists compute to be theoretically possible. It rained so hard, people couldn't breathe outside without covering their faces. Birds drowned in trees. Cows, countless cows were washed into rivers. And there was flooding, catastrophic flooding. Nelson County lost over 100 bridges. Waynesboro had 8 feet of water downtown. The James River in Richmond crested at 28 feet. But the human death toll didn't come from drownings. It came from mudslides. The people in the mountains from Charlottesville to Lynchburg had no warning. A few people even knew there was any danger. But as the rain kept pouring and the ground kept loosening and the hillsides gave way, in Nelson County alone, 123 people died, mostly from moving earth. The people who lived through Camille around here that I've talked to say that to date, they still have not experienced anything like it. $1 billion in today's dollars of damage was done in Virginia. Nearly 400 homes were destroyed. 153 people died, including 21 members of the same family. And to this day, some of the people who were trapped by the mudslides have never been found. Anyone who was of age in Central Virginia in 1969 remembers. They'll never forget. I wasn't around then, so I've just got stories that other people tell me. But it doesn't mean that I'm immune to tragedy, of course. I mean, there are traumatic events that we remember when we go through them, and they're forged into our mental pictures, not because of what we saw, but because of what we experienced. And we all have some of these. Sometimes these events are shared experiences, like when a hurricane demolishes a community, or for many of us, like me, 9/11. I remember that day distinctly. And I can tell you almost every detail about that day because of how I felt, the fear, and the steps that I took to protect my family from, well, no one really knew what at the time. I remember all about that day. It's like that moment is frozen in time. For me, anyway. For many of us. But that was 20 years ago. More modern tragedies that might affect a broader population in our rooms today include our infamous pandemic, a story we'll be telling for the rest of our lives. And for many of us, there are personal moments of loss. Those pictures are also permanently burned into our memories. The moment when you discovered the truth about the affair, or when you received the diagnosis, or like when I held my mother's hand as she took her last breath earlier this year. No one is exempt. I mean, these kinds of life moments, they come on all of us if we live long enough. Because not all of everything that happens in life is pleasant or good. Bad things happen. Bad things happen to all of us, even the most faithful among us. So the question is not if they will come. The question is, how do we respond when they come? That's the ultimate point of today's origin story. We're about to meet one of our ancestors who can really help us inspire to look at tragedy and betrayal and pain from a different perspective. His is an incredible story of one person who is passionate about following God, even though he was the victim of a major atrocity. His name is Joseph, and you can read about him in Genesis 37 to 50. Those are chapters, by the way, not verses. So obviously, I can't walk you through his entire life today, but I do think his story can offer some direction for us, especially when life gets really hard and when trauma and tragedy come our way. So let's look at the way that the writer of Genesis sets him up. He says, "Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. And he being Israel, the father, made an ornate robe for Joseph. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and couldn't speak a kind word to him." Joseph grew up in a devout Jewish family. Devout because, well, it pretty much defined his family. See, his father was Jacob, who God later changes his name to Israel. It's the same God, Jacob and Israel. So Joseph's father was Jacob or Israel. His grandfather was Isaac. And get this, Joseph's great-grandfather was Abraham, the Abraham. And so you can't really get more devoutly Jewish than this family right here. Joseph was raised to love God, and he did, and he followed God, and he listened carefully to God. He was the compliant child. He was the good boy. He worked hard. He was obedient and respectful. In our day, he would be the one we describe as the guy who got good grades, the kid who did extra credit work. He did his chores at home without complaining. He went above and beyond and pitched in whenever and wherever he was needed for help. Unfortunately, when a kid acts like that and there's more than one kid, that means sometimes the parents, in this case Joseph's parents, especially his dad, was constantly using him as the standard when he lectured the other kids. Why can't you be more like your brother Joseph? Now, if you have siblings, you probably had one of your siblings who was the example for all the rest. And if you didn't, then you were probably the one who was the example. I was that kid. I was the compliant child, the respectful one. I followed the rules. I got good grades. I didn't get into trouble. If I brought home a single B on a report card, I got interrogated and sometimes punished. My brothers would bring home straight D's. We would call the entire family and throw a party. Now, you might think it was a good place to be in my shoes, but it's actually not. Because you know that while your parents are lecturing your brothers to be more like Brian, your brothers are daydreaming about taking you out, which is exactly how Joseph's brothers felt. And while hiring a hitman, thankfully, was just a daydream for my brothers. It was deadly serious for Joseph's. "Come now," they say to each other, "let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him." This is how much disdain they had for their brother Joseph. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue Joseph from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take Joseph back to his father. So Joseph had at least one ally, his brother Reuben, who was the oldest, of course, the responsible one. He wasn't so much a Joseph fan, though. Reuben resents Joseph, just like all the other brothers, but he doesn't want to see Joseph get killed because he knows that this will break his father's heart. It will be devastating to his dad, who he loves. So Reuben's plan is to convince the other brothers not to kill Joseph, but let's just dump him in this empty well here, and then Reuben would covertly come back and get him later. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, the one their father gave him, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. And as they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. And Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay a hand on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." And the brothers agreed. What a generous person Judah is. He cares so much about his brother Joseph that he delivers this riveting, inspiring speech to the rest of the family. "He's our brother," he says. "He's our own flesh and blood. It just wouldn't be right to kill him. Let's sell him instead." And they do. They engage in one of the earliest historical accounts of human trafficking, and they make money selling their own brother. And then they take that ornate, colorful robe that their father Jacob had given to Joseph, and they rip it and dip it in blood. And they run back home and tell Dad, "This is all we found of your favorite son." Joseph, they say, in a stellar performance that would win them an Emmy today, Joseph, they say to their dad, has been eaten by a wild animal. They probably cried real tears. "Our poor brother is dead." Jacob never fully recovered. He mourned the loss until a later point in the story. And Joseph becomes a slave. A slave now. I want you to imagine with me the bitterness and the anger that would naturally, even maybe justifiably, come into Joseph's soul. The betrayal by his own flesh and blood, the lying, the hatred that his brothers had for him. I can't begin to fathom what it must have felt like to go from favorite son one minute to slave the next. Joseph even ends up in prison, near death, in unspeakably harsh conditions, all the result of this great injustice that he did not deserve. And he remains a slave for years, decades lost, stolen, never to be recovered. A little over 6 years ago, Larry Lee walked out of prison for the last time. He'd been there for more than 27 years, including 20 years on death row for a triple murder during a home robbery. But in June of 2015, the judge and the current prosecutor and the appeals court all agreed that the original prosecutor had no evidence and that he lied about the evidence that he did have, and he hid critical evidence that would actually have proven that Larry was innocent. 27 years gone, lost. But the promise of building a good life seemed like it was over. It just vanished. Not vanished. Stolen. Never to be recovered. In August of 2009, Philip Garrido began passing out flyers about this new church he was starting at the campus of University of California, Berkeley. So when campus security found out about this, they approached this guy and asked him to register his organization so that he could get started. And that led to a background check. And what they found was that the young woman with Garrido was not his daughter like he claimed, but J.C. Dugard, who had been kidnapped 18 years earlier. J.C. was locked in a makeshift recording studio. She was raped countless times. She had 2 children by her captors. 18 years. Almost 2 decades of agony for her parents, wondering what happened. Their little girl, now a woman with 2 children, returned to them, but that time, stolen, lost, never to be recovered. And the torture that happened to her, unspeakable. Whether we're the victims of evil intent, or maybe just the innocent bystanders caught in a storm, or sufferers of tragic loss, we all have things like this that happen. And what we need to know, what we really need to know, all of us, is when this comes my way, at whatever level and whatever it looks like and whatever the details are, how am I supposed to respond? And for many here today, you might be thinking, well, look, I'm not in the middle of a tragedy right now. What does this have to do with me? If that's you, the best time to think about your response is now. Before the storm comes with its deluge of emotions and earth moving beneath your feet. Now is the time to prepare your soul so that you can emerge stronger, even though the journey will still be painful. Joseph's response to his own loss and tragedy and injustice, it might give us a clue to how God wants us to approach ours. So a quick summary. Now, you really do need to read this. Genesis 37 to 50, chapters, not verses. Joseph divinely ends up in the right place at the right time in prison with the right people, and he gets summoned out of prison to meet with Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Shockingly, Joseph doesn't carry a chip on his shoulder about the crimes that were committed against him. I don't know how he pulls it off, but he does. He simply responds to the voice of God inside of him, and he ends up as Pharaoh's right hand. Not his number 1 slave, but the number 2 authority in the empire. Nobody was more powerful than Joseph, except for Pharaoh himself. It's a riches to rags to royalty story, but that's not where it ends. Stay with me. A severe famine comes for the whole region. And Joseph's brothers, remember, they're back there with their dad, and they think Joseph's dead by now. They are dispatched by their now elderly father to go to Egypt and buy some food. They don't have any food. They have no idea of the encounter that's about to happen, but God does. And so they travel to Egypt, and to their horrifying surprise, they end up in front of their long-lost brother, Joseph. And now, he has the power to kill them, or to imprison them, or to torture them, or to kill their families. He has the power to do anything he wants. And they are justifiably terrified, so they beg for mercy. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we're your slaves. We're your slaves." Isn't this fascinating? They sell Joseph into slavery, make money on the deal, lie to their father, assume after many years that Joseph is dead. And now the table's completely turned. They, the slave traders, offer to become slaves themselves as a plea for mercy from the one who'd been so epically betrayed. Let's sit here for a moment. Really. Let's have a real soul-level introspective evaluation. I want you to think about you. And I want you to imagine yourself in these shoes. You've been betrayed in the worst possible way, unimaginable, by people you trusted, people who were supposed to protect you. And it cost you something valuable, something you can't get back. It's just gone. Time, experiences, opportunities, potential lost, taken from you. But now, imagine that the same people who betrayed you and hurt you and cost you so much, they're not in power over you. They're begging you for mercy. Don't say it out loud. I just want you to think. What would you do? Now think, what should you do? Or to put it another way, to use spiritual language, what would God want you to do in that moment? His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we're your slaves." But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. What you meant for evil, God used for good." What you meant for evil, God used for good. See, God took Joseph, and through this tragedy, which God did not cause, he put Joseph in a place where he could store food, knowing that the famine was coming and lots of people were alive because of it. What they meant for evil, God used for good. This is one verse that every follower of Jesus ought to memorize. We ought to hang it on our walls. We ought to engrave it on our souls. It is that important. It should be the defining characteristic when we go through trauma and tragedy. What you meant for evil, God used for good. Because this embodies the essence of what we really believe, and it has major implications about our own response to injustice and tragedy and evil in our own lives. So let's unpack it just a little bit. Like the word evil. That's what Joseph says to them. You meant this for evil. And his brothers might argue with the word evil. I mean, it's a strong suggestion. I might not do the right thing, but evil? I can't help but remember God's conclusion when he assessed the state of the world's soul in the Noah story, the thing we unpacked a couple of weeks ago. Do you remember? Let me help you. The Lord saw, this is back in Genesis 6, how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. That was Genesis 6. But here we are now in the Joseph story, post-flood, generations later, evil having its way with humans again. Evil's a strong word. So is slavery. So Joseph just tells the truth. He doesn't let his brothers off the hook. He doesn't excuse their bad behavior. He doesn't downplay the impact. Instead, he just names it. What you did had evil intent or evil impact or both. Evil, as in not of God, not good, not right, not holy. And so when terrorists flew those planes into those towers and into the Pentagon, it had evil written all over it. When a deranged person stakes out a school or a campus and starts shooting, it has evil written all over it. When death comes, through an illness even, the fingerprint of the evil one is there. Because death was not God's plan. It was evil's consequence. But, this is the thing, evil doesn't win. God does. And Joseph's response, well, it ought to be ours. What you meant for evil, God used for good. What you meant for evil, God used for good. See, Joseph was able to see past the evil. The question is, can we? Because God never fails to use every situation, even evil, to cheat it of its corrupt intent. Joseph somehow understood this. And he refused to become the evil that had caused him so much harm. Instead, Joseph rose above his human circumstance and he grabbed the perspective of God, one that knew that God was bigger and God was stronger than any evil coming against you. So whatever you're facing or whatever you're about to face, you can be sure of this. The power of God working in your life will overcome the power of evil pushing against your life if you will stand firm against it. No matter what the enemy means for evil, God will use for something good. We can believe that. We can know it. We can claim it. So we want to teach you the bridge to this song, and it's a song that you might be familiar with. And we've sung it here before. Maybe you've sung it before. Maybe you'll recognize it. But look, this time I want you to change your posture a little bit. And I'm going to ask you to sing this like it's a prayer. Like it's a prayer towards God. It goes something like this. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. These words can be more than just a song for us. They can be our heart cry when trauma and tragedy come. So I'm going to ask you to stand up wherever you are, whether you're at home, online, or in one of our campuses today. I just want you to stand up with us. And our band is going to take you through this chorus, and we're going to lead to this point where we can declare that we're going to see a victory no matter what force comes against us, because God is that good. What others meant for evil, God will use for good.
You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory, for the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory, for the battle belongs to you, Lord. The weapon may be formed, but it won't prosper. When the darkness falls, it won't prevail. 'Cause the God I serve knows only how to triumph. My God will never fail. No, he won't. Come on. Oh, my God will never fail. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory, for the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory, for the battle belongs to you, Lord. Oh, we're gonna worship our way through this battle. We're gonna worship you. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. Yeah. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory, see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. Oh, you take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. Oh, you take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good.
Remember, the power of God working in your life will overcome the power of evil pushing against you if you will stand firm against it. No matter what the enemy means for evil, God will use it for something good. As we head into the holiday season, make sure you check out this week's follow-up from Pastor Brian as he discusses how to navigate the holidays, whether you've been hurt or even if you've been the one to hurt someone else. And if you're struggling to overcome hurt or tragedy, we're here to talk or pray with you. Just reach out in the chat right now, or you can text us at 804-492-1174. That's 804-492-1174. We'll see you next week as we kick off our new series, Living with Margin. It's a great time to invite a friend. See you then.